All right, week 15 is just about in the books. Damn, this season flew by. And as always, well, not quite always, been slacking a little bit lately, but most of the time, I link up with my main man, Charles Robinson, to react to NFL Sunday. And with a couple of weeks left, I feel like it's a good time to get ahead of what's known in league circles as Black Monday. The number 7 to 10 has been tossed around in terms of potential coaching vacancies. There are already some full-time vacancies, a few interims in place. There's always surprises at the end of the season. So I'd love to just kind of like empty a notebook, Charles, on who's coming and who's going from a head coach and or general manager perspective. We've already seen the Chargers clean house. I was just at that game in Las Vegas on Thursday, so I saw the end of the Tom Telesco, Brandon Staley era. We know the Panthers are looking for a full-time coach. And obviously the Raiders are looking for a full-time coach, and with more to come. But I want to start, though, because I want to start with what you and I have probably done about 2-3 conversations about this throughout the season. So why not come full circle, so to speak? Bill Belichick was on local radio this morning, and he was asked about basically the deafening silence coming out in New England, which is something that's always like I've struggled with, because which tells you everything. Because at any point, I get not feeding into the rumor mill, but at any point, whether it's off the record or on set for College Game Day, anybody associated with the Patriots could say, Bill Belichick's our coach for as long as he wants to be. They could say that. Absent saying that, it's pretty clear that there's going to be a change. There's been reports that the decision was made after the Germany trip, then reports to the contrary that no decision has been made. I don't know Robert Kraft well. I've known him for a long time. Knowing him the way I think I do, Charles, it feels like whatever happens with Bill Belichick, however it happens, A, he's going to be somewhere else, and B, it's going to take a long time to resolve it. I see this getting drug out deep into the offseason. I don't see that particular move being made on Black Monday.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting, like you said, the Tom Curran report comes out that the decision was made after the loss in Germany, where Bill was alerted, or I don't know, I guess however Tom described it, it was made clear that they were going to be separating at the end of the season. What was interesting about that was I made a couple of calls to people, one in the building, one outside of the building, but who has strong ties still inside the building. And what I was told was, well, right now, the coaching staff is operating as normal. Like they didn't become aware of this until the Tom Curran report dropped, and it was news to them. And so the thought process to me at that time was, well, if this is, and Tom, let's be real here. Tom Curran is a very well-sourced reporter. He's covered the Patriots for a long time. I think he's sourced at every level.
Covered him as long as I was there. When I was there, he was covering the Patriots. And at that point, 20 years ago, he had been covering the Patriots for 20 years.
Right. And it's sourced in the locker room, sourced in the front office, sourced in ownership, sourced in the coaching staff. So when he reports something, I'm like, yeah. And by the way, he's also someone who will ask Bill tough questions. Right. So it's not like it's just someone who's been around for a long time.
He's not on payroll.
No, he's not a wallflower at all. Right. Yeah. So I'm like, this is a heavy hitter. Okay. And so to me, I'm like, okay, I take serious. And but what I was told was, hey, until the Curran report came out, no one really had heard that in the building. Now, I think if something like that goes down, the circle is small, right? We're talking about the Krafts. Yes. We're probably talking about Bill and nobody else, right? And whoever those individuals want to tell, that's it. And so there's no reason coaches aren't going to start looking for a job in the middle of the season. There's no reason to, create chaos in an organization after that Germany game anyway. So let's just play the string out and see what happens. So my thought process was, if this got out, and I'm leaning on 20 plus years of covering the NFL here, there are times where ownership knows something tough is coming. Maybe you're separating yourself from a beloved player or a coach or something you think could be an unpopular decision or at least a talking point in your market. So what you do is you slide it out.
Little trial balloon. Yeah, little trial balloon.
Little trial balloon. Somebody you trust, right? Somebody you know, somebody you can count on. And by the way, somebody who also carries the weight of legitimacy when they cover something. And you go ahead and you slide it out, and you start to let your fan base and the surrounding, everybody kind of gets used to the idea of like, okay, so maybe this is coming. And it's well enough in advance that people have time to sort of ruminate about it. And beyond that, it also sends up a signal to the rest of the league. Hey, we could be looking for a quarterback here, or excuse me, we could be looking for a coach here and a quarterback, by the way.
Yeah.
I'll throw that in too. It sends up a signal to Mike Vrabel.
A little head start on the process.
Absolutely. Lets people know, hey, we don't have to go behind Bill's back and start a search or anything like that. We're just sort of putting it out there. People know, and it's going to become a talking point. And there are going to be other individuals out there that are going to go, New England, seems like New England's going to be open. And I think a lot of people have come to accept it to this point, right?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. It feels like the worst kept secret in the league right now. And with all due respect to Tom's reporting, and any other reporters who have been connected and kind of putting the writing on the wall themselves, my skepticism is more in, like, I've been married for 18 years. Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft been married for 24 years. I don't want to be out here in these streets. It's like, I know you like the same way with Dawn. Like, no matter how much they may get on our nerves, no matter how much we may get on their nerves, the idea of having to look for somebody, like, nah, man. Like, you know what? Love the one I'm with. I just think, and as speaking of Boston media, as Ron Borges once said that he told me that he told this to a fan. The difference between you and me is you think I know. All right, so Tom Curran knows. I think that Robert Kraft is just going to be way more deliberate about pulling the trigger on something that he hasn't had to do in a quarter century. I think frustration after Germany, frustration over this season, frustration over the last several years is one thing, but when it ultimately comes time to make a wholesale change, which you, me, and Shalise talked about in a previous edition of my main man, Michael Smith, a wholesale organizational shift and change, when this team on one side of the ball has been competitive, it could just be the quarterback situation. Maybe the quarterback mattered more than any of us ever imagined, even though he's the greatest of all time. It just feels like it's easier said than done, I guess is what I'm getting at. It's easy to talk shit and say, yo, can't wait to break up with this dude. I'm sick of this dude. Like, I can't stand him. Like, it's 24 years. You're like, want to move on. And it's like, are we really about to do this? And
I feel like in our lifetimes, we've all had that friend, right, that was in a relationship and his eye wanders and he goes, man, but if I was just single, there's this person I know who I really dig and I vibe with and all this stuff. Right. And then they break it off. Right. And then they find out that that person that they vibe with and that they dig isn't all that interested. And then they're like, oh.
But wait, I bought you a drink at the club. Like, wait, what?
Yeah. And then they're like, man, I don't know. Maybe I need to get back. Maybe I need to get back with a girl. Maybe I need to get, maybe this was a mistake. But you already made the mistake, right? You already ended it to move on, and now you're trying to circle back. So as you said, part of being deliberate here is, okay, so we can focus this. Let's just say it is Vrabel, right? Let's play the Vrabel game just so that we can hone in on one coach and then take it through the process.
You've been saying that for a while. Like, every time you say it, I believe it more. Every time you say it, I believe it more. I'm like, something's going down here. But go ahead.
Let's just say that that's who they want, right? They're interested. Well, okay. When the Broncos knew they wanted Sean Payton, it took forever, right, to figure out the compensation. It took forever that process went on forever, right? So even if they're interested, Mike Vrabel is going to cost, even if Mike Vrabel is interested, right? Let's say Mike Vrabel's like, man, we're like this. Has his interception luck is amazing. He probably could have 40 interceptions right now. His ball security is terrible. Like he's a major work in progress. I'm still getting to know Rand Carthon. Maybe it's best for me to just sort of, change horizons here. And we know that he has affection for New England, the Crafts, that job. There's a lot of respect. He has a very short list of, bucket list maybes, and that is on it. Okay. So, but let's say that the two sides are like, yeah, we're interested in each other. Okay. Well, first off, you got to go through the process of what do we do with Bill? Are we trading him? Are we just letting him walk? How long is this going to take? We want to do it in a way that's not completely messy and chaotic. And then after that, that's when we start to engage this idea of trading for Mike. Are they willing to let Mike go for a reasonable price? There's this multitude of things. And then what's Mike's contract going to be like here? All these different things. So there's no reason, 100%. There's no reason to think that this will not be messy. Okay. Or at the very least take an elongated period of time. But in terms of just whether or not it's going to happen, I think that seeing that organization going through this is a good example of this, going through the Josh McDaniels departure to Indianapolis taught me that nothing is necessarily over until it's over, because he was out, he was done, he was gone, he was hired Eberflus in Indianapolis, he's hiring coaches there, all these different things. And I had people telling me at that time, who I just completely blew off, who were like, wait, he's got to be at the press conference. Like, wait until he gets to the press conference. And Chris Ballard's getting a little nervous. Like, how come he's not there? How come the press conference has been pushed back? And then all of a sudden we find out that Robert Kraft made another run at him. Bill told Josh, we'll open the books. And then Josh ended up staying. So, to me, it's suggestive that there can be some last minute thinking in New England on the part of ownership, and they can change their minds, or at least decide this is the direction we're committed to. So I still think there's a chance that Tom Curran was correct. And yet
both things can be true.
Both things can be true. Yeah. Because that's a lot of time. And remember, you're emotional in that situation. Coming out of Germany thinking we're embarrassed. Why is everything going wrong? And we don't know what the direct dialogue was either. We don't know,
dialogue is the key word. Dialogue is a key word, because they could sit down, with Vince Vaughn and Luke Wilson, and they start splitting up the miles and whatnot, and then they start saying, you know what, maybe we need to get together. You want to give us somebody that makes you feel dangerous and also safe, and then you kind of like realize, no, we should actually stay together for one more year. It's like, it's not that bad. My point is, all it takes is one sit down between these two parties to change everything. And you said a lot of great things. The biggest thing you said was, this is going to come down to three people: Robert, Jonathan, and Bill. That's it. Like, those are the only people who definitively know where it is now and where it's going to end up. Another franchise that does not, that does not do the whole dating game thing. Like, they are, serial monogamous in Pittsburgh when it comes to head coaches. But it's just getting louder around Mike Tomlin. The noise is getting louder around Mike Tomlin. Even had Ben Roethlisberger on his podcast saying that maybe, the Steelers culture is dead, or Steelers, whatever he said, way has gone. And if there's any organization where the outside noise would belie the inside noise, it is Pittsburgh. I would say even more so than New England. Because it almost feels like Pittsburgh is oblivious to pressure from the outside, at least in recent history. What's your read on that? Like, could Mike Tomlin end up moving on from Pittsburgh? I think he's got 1 year left on his contract after this year. They were fortunate to make the playoffs thanks to Brandon Staley a couple of years ago. But more often than not, it's been a lot of disappointing seasons, even though still no losing seasons in Pittsburgh. But, I was there 2 Thursdays ago when they lost to New England. And it just feels like that organization, at least relatively speaking, They're still 500. Relatively speaking, has hit rock bottom, if not close to it. Will that cost Mike Tomlin?
So what I would compare this to is when Andy Reid left Philly. Okay, when he was ousted in Philly, and to me, I think I remember. So Andy got ousted,
which is crazy to think about, by the way.
It's crazy to think about. Yeah. And he was hired 6 days later, I think, in Kansas City. 6 days. He was unemployed a whole 6 days.
Yeah. And now he's one of the greatest coaches of all time.
Yeah, and I talked to somebody who in the front office, and in retrospect, this was a few years later, and I said, what happened? Like, what was it that, because obviously Andy's a great coach, like what? And he said to me, sometimes realistically, the message, it really just does get stale. Like it just you just get to a point where it's like the process feels so cyclical that there's just the spark gets lost in that, and that even though you're probably better team than you've been showing, you're a good team, you're a better team than maybe what the record reflected the previous year, and even though that's a good coach, it does feel like you're on this merry-go-round where you're just sort of, okay, we know the culture, it's filled with people who know the coach, we've been through the song and dance enough that we're it's like working for an organization. I've worked for Yahoo for a really long time, and so I see a lot of things happen internally, and I'm like, this is the third time we're on that one. It's like you're like, okay, this new idea has happened 4 times before. Like,
Seen this movie, sort of
yeah, exactly. So and what happens in those situations is you have to very much self-motivate. And so that puts it on a lot of players to go, hey man, I got to get myself up. Like I've heard this before. This, the external stuff's not working anymore. I need to be the person who gets myself lit, or I need to lean on my teammates to help get myself going. Like this is, and that is difficult for an organization when you can't necessarily lead or count on things leading from the top. It can be really difficult, and not because it's not a good leader. It's just because it's a lot of ideas that you already know it. So I think in Pittsburgh, it's possible that that's something that has happened under Mike Tomlin. Although I will say this, I think if that ownership were to look at it fairly, I think they could look at Mike Tomlin and say, okay, there's a change at offensive coordinator. We have to figure what's going on. We have to figure out what's going on with George Pickens. But I would assess whether he should be in the organization another year. Okay,
who George Pickens?
Yeah, absolutely. Given what's going on with him, I would consider trading him this offseason.
Oh my God, you are like truer words have never been spoken in terms of like there's professionalism and then there's George Pickens. Right. It's like for all the talent, for all the ability, for all the fire that he chooses to show when he feels like it behind the scenes. I think you've heard the same things I've heard. Dude's a problem. I was also going to say, what's interesting that both Mike Tomlin and Bill Belichick have in common beyond being the longest tenured coaches in the league? Neither one of them got a quarterback and haven't had one for several years.
Right. And see, to me, that's the thing too, though, is okay. So if I'm ownership, I sit there and I go, okay, well, the Pickens thing doesn't feel like it's a good alignment for our organization. Maybe he needs to be somewhere else where he's with a veteran quarterback in a veteran wide receiver room. It feels like that's really what he needs. Okay. And or at least it's not happening here. So we got to figure out how to move on from this situation. Number 2, we swapped out offensive coordinators. We need to get this settled in the offseason. What's the offensive scheme we're going to be running? Who do we want manning the controls? Number 3, it's Pickett it's going to be year 3 for Pickett. Okay. And I think we all agree for the most part, most quarterbacks, if you don't have it after year 3, you don't have it. Right. So you're rebuilding.
At least not at that first stop. Right.
Sure. Not at that first stop. That's what I'm saying, at that first stop. So
shout out to Baker Mayfield.
Right. So if you don't, I think you're like, all right, well, a natural pivot point, frankly, could be coming after 2024, because if Kenny doesn't have it by the end of 2024, we're probably looking for another quarterback anyway. And here's a little one that I'll tell you. highly doubt this is a situation that could occur in Pittsburgh. But, you know, I know there are people in that organization who liked Fields a lot, Justin Fields a lot when he went into that draft. And so I wonder, although again, I don't think this is happening, and I don't think unless there's a scheme change, which again, it doesn't really fit well for Pickett either. I wonder if you look at adding somebody at quarterback as well, you know, just to look, Trubisky, I'm sorry. He's not to me, he might be like a 1-game stopgap. He's not our start went down and we got the rest of the season with the stuck in.
They already on to Mason Rudolph. So exactly.
Right, like, exactly.
He ain't the guy.
So to me, I would like to see them give Mike one more shot at having sort of a complete team, a coordinator change that's been made, getting somebody out of the building that I think is necessary to get him out of the building. I would like to see them give it one more season to clean up. And I know people are going to say, well, lame duck. I don't believe in lame duck. I think that's bullshit. I think no one's going to look at Mike Tomlin and go, man, you're a lame duck. No, that's not happening. Of all the people in the league, I don't think he's going to have that kind of a problem. Right. I would let him take the contract to completion. If it doesn't work after 2024, then he's a free agent, right? Then you just move on. You have a pivot point.
Yeah. 2 things to that. One, and I had an executive say this to me the other day, and it's so obvious, but nobody had ever said it to me this way, so it kind of stuck. It was like, everybody's an interim, whether they got the tag or not. Everybody's an interim. So what does lame duck really mean in the NFL? Number one. Yeah. Number 2, Mike Tomlin treats his players like adults. And guys like George Pickens, it doesn't work. Like, that works if you have a certain level of maturity among your players. If you have a guy like a George Pickens that's going to take advantage of that environment, you got a problem. Okay, going to another historically flagship franchise, but let's get a 2-for-1 in here. Going back to Thursday night's disaster and devastation, I guess. One end it was, old school Raider dominance, and it was obviously a disaster for the Chargers, Tom Telesco and Brandon Staley. Did that game both lose? Well, and they were, already on the hot seat anyway. Did that game both lose Staley and Telesco their jobs and simultaneously earn Champ Kelly and Antonio Pierce their jobs? Because if I am Mark Davis and I'm still paying John Gruden and the aforementioned Josh McDaniels, by the way, but not that should be the driving force, but it's not nothing, right? It's something. Mm-hmm. And once upon a time, I had a guy in Rich Bisaccia that got the team to respond post John Gruden, but because I had a wandering eye, because I was the 80-20 rule, I wanted Josh McDaniels, the same I was infatuated with John Gruden, I went and got McDaniels instead of keeping Rich Bisaccia. It's like, I know 63 is an outlier, but coming back from losing 3-0 to winning 63 to whatever it was, it's like, what more would Mark Davis need to see, and what more could he want on the open market? It just feels like that game, and I know there's 3 very difficult games left, so the evaluation process continues. I get it. But it feels like that game should have showed Mark Davis all he needed to see about Antonio Pierce's ability to lead. Whether now, game management, X's and O's, maybe that's not his thing. But why can't Antonio Pierce be, and I mean this respectively, why can't he be Herm Edwards? Herm Edwards is never a coordinator. Sure. Herm Edwards had good coordinators, and Herm Edwards had control of that locker room in New York and then in Kansas City. Why can't Antonio Pierce, and he talked about this with our guy, Sean Reed. There are 3 categories. There's your offensive genius, the defensive genius, or your special teams genius, 4 categories, and your leadership guys. Why can't Antonio Pierce, coincidentally, was at Arizona State with Herm Edwards. Why can't he be Herm Edwards? Because clearly this team is responding to him, and they got some good young pieces that Champ Kelly helped bring in the building. Well, that feels like I've seen all I need to see about Mark Davis.
Well, and you brought a name that matters, Champ Kelly. I think Champ Kelly is going to weigh into this, and I think
he gets that job too. Yeah,
I think he gets that job. Yeah, I think he gets that job, and I think that he weighs very heavily into this decision with Mark. I think if Champ says to Mark, I can work with this guy. Like I have trust. We have a bond. I know what he wants. He knows I can bring him what he wants. And there's a realistic tandem that you have here that it's not like, look, Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels, a lot of what happened in that building was very Josh McDaniels driven. And I think there were times where it was like, I mean, I remember when they both got fired. I mean, there were people who were like, man, Dave kind of got flagged in that situation when he really shouldn't have. Like it was a lot of it was not Dave's fault. And then, they beat the Chargers and all these rookies are showing out. And I damn well know a lot of people texted Dave Ziegler across the league going, hey, man, how you feeling tonight? Probably pretty good, right? Like maybe they should have had some patience.
Right.
So I think, for Mark Davis, there's two aspects of this. Number one, if you keep Champ, and I do think that's the direction it's going at general manager,
Agreed.
Who does he want to work with? And if he and Antonio, and you're like, okay, if he and Antonio are tight and the team is responding to Antonio, and he is that leadership category guy, like you said, not everybody has to be a coordinator to get a spot. And especially not everybody has to be an offensive or defensive coordinator. I mean, look at John Harbaugh was a special teams coordinator, and he's one of the best coaches.
Touch the whole team,
touch the whole team, right? They always have a global view of the whole team. But again, everybody seems to be responding to Antonio. Let's see how the season finishes out. So there's all that, and there's Champ, and then I think really the second part of this is, what are your alternatives? Who are you going to get? Like what is that's the thing. Is like, can you get something better? Like, are you just moving on to move on, or do you have something that is absolutely superior? I don't know that they do.
Well, that brings me. Okay, so thank you, because I was going to take a detour, and you put on the turn signal. This is perfect, because other than Ben Johnson,
right,
and to a lesser extent, Lou Anarumo in Cincinnati, but other than Ben Johnson, the OC in Detroit, and Lou Anarumo, the DC in Cincinnati, it just doesn't feel like there are a bunch of hot candidates. Because even for example, even in Los Angeles with the Chargers, huh?
Well, I mean, one of the guys that, I hear when I talk to people about who's really showing out, particularly at coordinators. A lot of guys are like, man, you know how hard it is to play against Flo's defense right now? And I'm like, that's definitely not going to be something for the Raiders.
I mean, listen.
Given everything that's going on with the Gruden lawsuit.
But that would be poetic. That would be poetic. You want to win that lawsuit? Hire Brian Flores on the merit of his previous head coaching record and the fact that he's got a defense that's kicking ass and taking names right there. So, okay, maybe it's Brian Flores. But it's funny you bring up Flores, because wouldn't it be poetic, ironic, whatever the right word is, if Eric Bieniemy, and I know Washington hasn't been great on offense this year, you know what I mean? They just benched Sam Howell at the end of the game. But wouldn't it be interesting if Eric Bieniemy got his shot coming off the Commanders in a losing season when he didn't get his shot, being a part of Chiefs Kingdom? That's another guy. But I'm wondering, I say that to say it doesn't feel like there's necessarily new names, Slowick in Houston. It doesn't feel like there's new names, though, that you're hearing, other than Ben Johnson, who was a hot guy last offseason. It almost feels like this could be a year talking about who you're going to get. Okay, I was saying Los Angeles, because even Kellen Moore, whereas Kellen Moore was once upon a time a hot guy, is the shine off of him. Or maybe he gets a job just in the same way I remember Mike McCarthy connecting those dots. Mike McCarthy got it coming off of being the offensive coordinator for, at the time, one of the worst offenses in modern NFL history, if I recall correctly, with Alex Smith in San Francisco early in his career. He still got the Green Bay job, and that certainly turned out perfectly. So it's not always, is your offense or defense number one in the league, or is it dominant? It's not always the hot winning team coordinator. Sometimes the guy that just interviews well. But I guess my overall point is, could it be a year for some of the retreads, if you will, or guys that have been waiting for second opportunities? A Dan Quinn, even though he probably could have had a second opportunity, but maybe passed a few times. A Dan Quinn, a Raheem Morris, given what's going on in Los Angeles and what he's doing with the Rams defense and their resurgence. Who are the names other than Flores, tongue-in-cheek, because, we know how it works, but maybe we'd be pleasantly surprised. Who are the names other than Ben Johnson that you're hearing in terms of he's going to be the hot guy during this head coaching cycle?
Brian Johnson, maybe one that will surprise people a little bit. Drew Petzing
Okay.
in Arizona. Drew Petzing.
Okay.
I think people, when you look at the tools that he's working with, the talent on that roster, the fact that he spent most of the season without Kyler, all these different things, and yet how he has called it, some of the schemes that he's brought to the table, I think are impressive to people out there. That's probably a name that I think people are like, wait, what?
But I also perked up at Brian Johnson because Brian Johnson, they've been like, oh, he's going to be a head coach someday. And at the beginning of the year, I know there was a lot of frustration, going from Steichen to Johnson and some of the transition, and just they weren't firing all cylinders in Philadelphia. But that's a guy that's kind of been stamped from the beginning in terms of oh yeah, he's going to be a head coach someday. Could it be this soon?
I think it could, because I know people are looking at that transition from Steichen to Johnson, and I truly think that if you give him another year in Philly, you will see all that stuff smooth out, right? I didn't think it was necessarily going to be seamless, but I think the part of the equation that people get lost in the sauce with how the season started and some of the struggles that they've had is he was the guy who was with Hurts as his quarterback's coach.
Correct.
When those monumental steps took place in 21 and 22, right? And so for me, and I'll give you an example.
So don't blame him for this year and not give him credit for previous
years. Okay, right. Yeah, that's exactly it. If you're going to be critical of him this year, at least look at the wider picture and know the role he played, because he was by far the person who was most hands-on with Hurts during that period of development. He was there with him every day, working with him every day. So there's that, but I'll give you an example of why I think he's still high on lists. So last week I worked on, this idea that Fields, I reached out to a ton of GMs and I said, tell me, what would the compensation be for Justin Fields if he gets traded at the end of the season? And then once they answered that question, I was like, all right, would you take Caleb Williams and trade Fields? If you're in that seat, what would you do? And, so I polled them all on this. And then once I got beyond that, I started to ask them, well, who should I be looking at as suitors? And a number of them brought up, well, where he'd look good if you're going to get away from Atlanta, because a lot of people are looking at Arthur Smith and that RPO stuff, and they're like, that scheme fits him really well. I want to get to him too. Yeah. But if you get beyond him, where else would you put him? And a lot of people were like, well, funny thing is, what I would put him is, Philly, because that offense is perfect for him, or Indianapolis, because Steichen is running that offense in Indianapolis. But geez, they both have their quarterbacks. So what I would do is look where Brian Johnson goes. If he goes to a team where, let's say he gets hired, and they thought highly of him, if he gets hired by a team that has a draft pick in the teens, they don't have a resolution at quarterback, they can't trade up to get a guy to restart this thing, the smart money would be on Fields being an option there. If Fields is going to get dealt out of Chicago, put him in the Philly offense with Brian Johnson with, let's say, again, this is just me throwing a team out there, but the Saints or, a team like that. Yeah. So I think just based on those conversations, without bringing his name up, there were multiple GMs who brought his name up. And I'm like, okay, he's still, despite the struggles,
he's on people's radar.
He's still on people's radar, and people are still impressed with what has happened with Hurts. And, so I still think that's a name but I do agree with you. There is a significant retread factor, and I hate to use the word retread because, Dan Quinn's a quality coach. Raheem Morris is
Raheem Morris is a great coach.
Great coach. We're great with a ton of young guys in LA, right? And if you knew how Raheem's first stop went, that was the quintessential super young dude who gets a job. Yep. And it's he's not at the point where he can do the Tomlin thing and go, yeah, I know y'all think I'm your friend, but I'm not. Straight up. You can respect me, and I'm going to run you. Hey, the fitness test? This Hall of Fame wrist tackle we got? I'm going to make him puke. He's going to quit the fitness test 6 times before we pass him to play this season. He just wasn't that guy in Tampa.
But I'm going to tell you. But I'm going to tell you, those are the types of coaches I would want, man. In church, Like, you want a pastor that's got a testimony. Like, you want a preacher that can relate to you. You don't want somebody that's like, that ain't never been through shit. That ain't never like, they never fallen by the wayside. You want somebody that's got real lived experiences. Like, as a coach, don't give me the person who has been protected his entire career by the infrastructure of, I don't know, Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. Don't give me the guy that's done nothing but win his entire career. Give me the guy that has had a job before, failed at that job for whatever reason. Give me the guy that's been an interim coach in Atlanta, held it together as best he could. Give me the guy that's been with Sean McVay. I thought Sean McVay was the golden ticket. I thought he was the name that should drop. That's been with Sean McVay running that defense, which got Brandon Staley a job, for crying out loud. It's like, hey, why not a guy that's got all these different experiences and that can weather storms the way a Raheem Morris has?
I once had a GM call it construction hands. You want construction hands on this one. You want somebody who's got some
stuff,
some stuff on those hands.
It's been through, a little callus or whatever. You
don't want someone who's been using the moisturizer on those hands every single day, right? Like, who's got the nice soft handshake. No, they want construction hands. So I agree. I think, and I think Quinn has an aspect of that. I think Raheem has an aspect of that. I think there are a few guys out there that are going to fall in, and even the enemy, which is interesting because, as you said, I think I've learned so much more about Eric in this stop, and even I think it's interesting because I kept hearing like, why is he not getting these jobs? He's interviewing. People are saying he doesn't necessarily interview well, and I think the whole thing. Well, no, I'm going to tell you what I think that means. I think he is an intense.
He doesn't code switch.
Dude. I think he's
and he doesn't code switch. Right, correct. But he also doesn't code switch.
Exactly, right.
He's New Orleans dude.
Like he's right.
You know what I mean?
Right, that's
home team.
Right, that's exactly it. He's not all of a sudden going to be, I talk like this. Like, no, that's not how he's going to do interviews. He's going to go and be in himself. He's crazy intense to the point where you see, like, players are like, holy shit. Like, this is like, you've seen that in Washington and even in Kansas City, there were times where I was like, damn, he kind of got into it with Mahomes there. Like, he is that guy. And so I think some of those interviews, he goes in and owners are used to guys being like, all right, well, here's my plan and here's my book and here are the coaches I would hire. And let's talk about synergy.
Are they comfortable around that type of energy? Are they comfortable more than anything?
Right.
Yeah. Can they relate? And can they connect? Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but I do think that it's been, even though it's Washington, everybody looks like probably is going to get fragged there. I do think it's been a good thing for him because it's been revelatory in terms of like, what is it about him? I think now we kind of know. You see what you see is what you get with him, but he's had success there too in some respects with players that I don't think are necessarily starting caliber players long term. So, I mean it's. A lot of this guidance with these jobs is going to depend on really realistically who out there can be gotten. Who are the other candidates? Some people use search firms. Others will call owners that they respect. I'm talking about owners here. Will call other owners they respect or coaches or GMs and say,
or call Bill Belichick. But let me try to. I said I was gonna kill two birds with one stone a different time. I'm serious this time because there's the Commanders, Josh Harris, that ownership group, including Magic Johnson. For the longest time, they were being linked to Bill Belichick. The Chargers job, which we mentioned before, that's also been linked to Bill Belichick, given the presence of a Justin Herbert. Not sure about how much they'd be willing to spend on a Belichick. Just historically, the Spanos family is not a free spending family. Also got a really bad cap situation. But regardless, those two gigs in particular, do you see Bill Belichick, assuming that, the writing on the wall is accurate, that his time in New England is up, which we already covered that. Who knows what could happen? There's still time. But assuming that he is done in New England, do you see him ending up in either one of those places? And if not, like, what do you think the Chargers are looking for? What do you think the Commanders are looking for?
So the Chargers job is the feel on the Chargers job when you talk to people across the league. Good coach job. bad GM job. It's good. That's if you want to be a coach, go get that job. Great, because you got some talent on the roster. But if you want to be a GM,
got a quarterback.
You're gonna go in there as a GM and you're gonna be like, oh my god, like all right, we got some cap issues here. We got money committed. It's gonna be. You're not changing a lot there for a bit. You're going to be kind of strapped into the previous regime's decisions. So to me, I think that's what they lean into. Like, I think it's I know a lot of people want to say, well, they'll go out and they'll get, the young offensive coordinator to pair with Herbert. I don't know about that. I think they might just go, we're going to go get someone experienced who can come in here. Right. And I know
a Quinn feels like a good fit there. Or we talked about Raheem Morris. Get a Raheem Morris. You already got him in the building, technically. Well, not the building, the stadium. Right. But, and Quinn, he's right there. You got to move.
Quinn interviewed there, too, once for that job, and he got passed. And sometimes I think at Denver, like Quinn was the runner-up in Denver to Nathaniel Hackett. And I certainly think and Hackett was clearly, I think a big part of that hire there was the thought process of pairing with Aaron Rodgers, which didn't happen. But I do think, prior to going and getting Sean, there was what would have happened? Like there was this, there's the multiverse. What would have happened if we had hired Dan Quinn instead? Where would we have been as a team and all these different things? So I wonder if with the Chargers, there's a inclination to go, well, we like that because Quinn has interviewed really well everywhere he's gone. He's got the chops. Obviously, everything he's done in Dallas has done nothing but heighten his resume beyond the head coaching experience. So I think in my mind, San Diego, geez, the Los Angeles Chargers will be leaning into, still like years later. Yeah. I'll be doing it by the way forever.
Yeah. His mama named him Clay. I'm going to call him Clay. They're the San Diego Chargers.
You can go ahead and put it on my headstone. San Diego. Oh, jeez. I mean Los Angeles Chargers. So I think in that respect, I think they would lean toward a veteran head coach. I don't know that Bill would necessarily be that guy. Washington, to me, I could see making more sense with Bill because I could see from what I know, Josh Harris is very intrigued with the idea of having a more global person in that position. And when I say global person, I mean someone who has the ability to tweak or lay the foundation beyond just the coaching staff. We're talking about front office. We're talking about really everything, like a ground up sort of not rebuild, but let me look at everything and tell you how we can construct this in a way that makes a lot of sense. But I do think Harris would like to have a coach who's going to be there for a long time. So that's another thing too, where I'm like, I don't know if it necessarily makes sense there. One I will put out there that is not really in the mix. I will be curious if Jason Light steps down in Tampa.
Steps down.
No. I think if Jason Light, let's say, retires or whatever, just basically says, I'm good. I'm gonna take some time and steps away from the general manager position in Tampa. I think I would not necessarily rule out Tampa potentially being a stop for Bill Belichick. So
that's a note I haven't heard. Okay.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's a little bit. That one got put on my radar and a few weeks ago, and so just let's see what happens in Tampa over the rest of the season. But I wouldn't necessarily
get to follow in Tom Brady's footsteps.
Would that not be hilarious?
It kind of would be. Then he's chasing Brady again. But no, but I like the Washington.
He walks in, the Brooks was here.
Right.
It's the same. So what's red?
Right. But no, I like the Washington angle, though, because it reminds me of George Allen back in the day in like an over-the-hill gang type situation, bringing in a 70-something-year-old Bill Belichick. All right, we've covered the Bears pretty much ad nauseum this season, and you wrote a great article about the market for Fields. DJ Moore ain't trying to hear it, but I think, well, quickly, I'll say this. It feels like there's been enough progress where Poles and Eberflus feel like they'll get more time. Like that was I don't know that people truly understand how much work. No, you feel like it could be a house cleaning still.
I don't think Poles. I think there's a chance that Poles
still Eberflus.
I think there's a chance that Eberflus gets replaced, but I think a lot of that is going to lean on how does Poles handle I think by the time it was all done, when the piece ran, it was 7 GMs. But you know how it is, like people get back to you a day after
seven more. Like, oh, I'm sorry, deadline already passed.
No,
damn it.
It was like 13. Okay, 13. Okay, by the time it was
13
done,
on top of the 7 or 6 more.
No, 6 more. Yeah, 6 more. Right.
Oh,
and then a whole lot of ones who ignored me. Like you're just like, I'm not gonna
and they called you up and it was like, oh man, I really wanted to be quoted anonymously. Sorry, I missed you. Sorry, I missed your deadline.
Well, interestingly enough, 6 more wanted to weigh in, and the split ended up being 11-2. There were 2 dissenters. 11 said trade Fields, draft Caleb Williams. There were 2 dissenters that said no way, stick with this, use the picks to accrue other picks, build. And then all of them kind of said, okay, hey, the range here, all 13 agreed. The range was somewhere in the neighborhood of like a 2 for Fields and maybe a late pick back, or like a 3 that could graduate to a 2 with performance. It was all in that range of like, kind of like late 2, 3-ish plus something. That's sort of the range, the trade range. But to me, they all agreed too. Like, hey, it's like the most of them that talked about it. We're on the outside looking in. We don't know how Poles, values what he is seeing, the progress he is seeing. He is the one who's there every day. So, Fields could absolutely be a viable piece in his mind where he is seen. Let's look at the first 17 starts of his career, the last 17 starts of his career. I think he's got like 34. Now he's at 35, but like we that's 2 full seasons. Let's see, just from a dumb statistical perspective, how much has he improved?
Sure.
So I do think there's a possibility that things all remain the same in Chicago, but I do think it's going to lean on where their assessment lands at the end of the season on Fields, where their assessment lands on the quarterbacks that are available at 1. And then if they make that change, I would be surprised if the 2 decisions that Poles can make here is go get a quarterback, which he's never done in that organization. Fields was from the last regime. And then do I pair that quarterback with an offensive guy that I am hiring to bring in to nurture him moving forward? So,
it was all I would say. It was a huge fixer-upper, which wasn't going to be an overnight success. And they've been playing great football lately. I mean, the Montez Sweat trade has been a stroke of genius.
Oh, yeah.
And so they've been playing, barely lost to one of the best stories in the league right now, which is the Cleveland Browns. Okay, so that's the Bears. We definitely devoted a full episode to David Tepper and the Panthers, so we don't need to revisit that, I don't think. The only thing that changed since we last talked, unless you tell me another thing you picked up, is they got one more win at the expense of the last situation I do want to discuss, which would be Arthur Smith and the Atlanta Falcons. So I'm trying to separate fantasy from reality, because fantasy people fired Arthur Smith long time ago. Are we talking about like actual football? He's still frustrating. And now losing to, Carolina, when you scored 1 touchdown on an offense and maybe he just needs a quarterback. Maybe Desmond Ridder just ain't the guy. Maybe it's not as simple as plugging a guy surrounded by Bijan Robinson and Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Maybe it's not that simple. Surprise. But losing to Carolina with an interim coach, it almost feels like there were 2 losses in week 15 that felt like, death knells, if you will. Brandon Staley giving up 63 to a Raiders team that didn't score the week before under an interim coach. And then Arthur Smith losing to the Panthers. I get it's a division game. I get it's a division road game in the elements. But still, it's like, how much time is Arthur Smith going to get to be, respectfully, mediocre at best in Atlanta?
Well, here's the thing, too. When they were 6-6, when I was sitting there and I was kind of crunching potential coaching changes, I looked at that and I said, well, the only way he loses his job is if he just screws it up the rest of the way. Like he's 6-6. They have the ability to win this division. To me, there's no way you replace this guy if he wins the division, goes to the playoffs. He's had 2 years of, subpar records, but they weren't 4-13, right? Like, so
no, they haven't been awful. No,
they haven't been awful. He's competitive, not winning, not above 500, but competitive for 2 seasons.
There's a Jeff Fisher feel to him.
It does, which is, but not like in a good way, like kind of like, all right, so we're gonna sit here and go about 5, or we're gonna be a game above 500, we're gonna be a game below 500. Like, this is just kind of who we are. So, but that now they've lost 2, and then the Carolina is just a debacle. And I think what really hurts him, ownership. I know, I will tell you this, man. Talking to somebody inside the org there. Arthur Blank was sold on Desmond Ridder. Like, no, we got our quarterback. Like, trust me, like he's gonna
had no interest in Lamar Jackson.
He like, absolutely, we got right that, and then you go through the whole Lamar Jackson thing, which was just not even remotely a thought process in the org, and so Arthur Blank sold on this guy, and I think it is becoming extremely clear in that organization that no, he is not the guy. He has these limitations. And by the way, we've put dynamic players around him, and yet the scheme is not, it's not electric. It's not, and despite it being, it's a modern scheme that they're running. And yet you feel, when you watch it, you're like, it feels limited. And whether it's Drake London or Kyle Pitts or Bijan, really the whole running back depth chart there, there's pieces there to be a more dynamic team than they are. But I think it's the limitations of Ridder that ultimately, stall this out, because I don't think he's a dynamic quarterback. I don't. And he's not a, I wouldn't say that Kirk Cousins is a dynamic quarterback, but you know what? Kirk Cousins, he can win from the pocket. There's an element of toughness that he has that teammates respect. He does have the ability to hurt you. Ridder, a lot of things around him have to be helping in that respect. Ridder, a lot of things have to be helping around him in that respect. So I think if he gets fired, I think it's because of what's gone on with Ridder and the fact that they have to lean into a new quarterback there. And if I'm them, I absolutely would look at Fields. Like, if you're going to keep Arthur Smith, I absolutely would go, okay, we're going to keep you, but we're going to go get this guy, and we're going to put him in your system, and he's going to play in a dome. And
so let me ask you this. I heard that the Fields connection to Atlanta. You ever hear something from a place that journalistically you just know that's not a credible source, but that source still has a conviction about what they're telling you, whereas okay, I'm going to put this in the back of my head and not be surprised if and when it happens, but ain't nothing I could go and report credibly. Have you heard that, like, that's a thing? Or does it just make sense?
No.
As a fit.
It's a fit. It's a fit. It's 100%
because I've heard it. Because I've heard it. I've heard it, and this is like, do not put any stock in this. Like, but I'm just saying this for purposes of this conversation. I have heard it as like a thing, like it's going to happen this offseason.
Oh,
and now if it does happen, I'll take credit for it. But in the meantime, do not put any stock in this, because if I had conviction about it, I would have reported it myself. I'd have tweeted it, whatever. I'd have put it on the record. I was like, okay, if you say so. It was like, dude, okay, because how those back channel conversations. But it could be nothing. It could be false rumor mongering. When you said it, I just wondered if it was like, oh, wait, are you hearing something, Chuck? Or are you just saying it's a good fit for that system?
It's not like this is coming from Terry Fontenot or, someone connected to Terry Fontenot. No, I mean, I think even when...
But it would be sexy. It would definitely be sexy. A little modern, little Michael Vick reincarnated.
Yeah. Well, and when Atlanta's brought up, and it's other GMs that bring it up. When I say, tell me the fit, they point at that offense, and they go, okay, well, that's what makes sense. It's the stuff that they run. It is suited to his skill set. Again, I think the fact that they play in a dome helps. I think the fact that they play in a division where you're your team, another dome team, and then a warm weather team.
And in Tampa.
And in Tampa, warm weather team. So it's like there's a lot of very good, like in terms of like the acclimation of, okay, your home schedule is going to include 8 dome games. Your road's going to have 8 or 9 dome games. Your road's going to have a warm weather destination and another dome. Okay, so that's like 10, 11 games you're playing in great conditions that really suit this, aspect of Justin Fields' game. And then you run a scheme too that is really, and that's the primary. You run the scheme that makes a lot of sense. But no, I have not heard it, someone saying that's a thing. Not from anybody credible. Gotcha. I've seen people write it and talk about it and everything, but I haven't. I don't have any first-person information in that respect.
All right. Charles Robinson, my main man, I appreciate you, brother. Thank you for all the insight as usual. Always got to remember there are not just head coaches and people, but there are families of staffs, assistants, the entire organization,
a lot of
lives in the matter. Yeah, a lot of jobs, a lot of livelihoods, a lot of kids changing schools. It's really, can't even quite comprehend all that's going to change in a couple of weeks on what we,
And the one thing I would say for people who are listening, and I learned this the hard way, I learned this by, covering the space for the longest time, is always remember these head coaches and these general managers, and then for, a lot of coordinators, all these different people, these are people who work their entire lives to get this opportunity at this job. And when they get fired, no matter how you feel about what they did, you have to process that this is the worst day of their life that has nothing to do with like a death in the, this is the worst professional day in their life.
Right.
This is, and so I in the past, I've been guilty, and it's been a while, but I've been guilty of being like the hot seat. You got to fire this guy, or you got to do this, or you got to do that.
Or not just that. And I don't think I've ever. I'm not gonna say never, because I've been doing this for a long time, and I've said a lot of shit on television, so on camera or on microphone. So maybe I have. I typically am not a call for someone's job person. I've tried never to be that, but it is part of the business as well. It's what they sign up for. Same with players. Players get traded. Players get cut. It's a bottom line business. They understand that. But nonetheless, it is still people involved, human beings involved. It's a fine line, because a lot of times we get caught up really just in the race to be first about, who gets let go and who, like, so even this conversation while we're having, while it's just about like, it's very matter of fact, nonetheless, we are talking about people at the other end of, for a job to come open, somebody's got to get fired.
Every once in a while, though, Urban Meyer comes along and
right. Well, there you go. There's one. Yes.
No, you got to fire that dude.
Right.
So there
and listen, I'll be honest. As much as friendly and as cordial as my interaction with Brandon Staley has been, it's like, bruh, like, ain't but so much you could do and keep it. You know what? Sometimes it just change is necessary.
Ain't nobody staring at 42-0 at halftime against the Raiders and going, but let me make my case. It's like, no, it's definitely it's sort of like, you're like, it's kind of.
Listen, when the Spanoses make a change in season, I mean, it was like it was time. It was time. So no, you're right. There are Urban Meyer. That's a good example. There, and I'm sure there are others. But sometimes it's just like, man, you got to bounce. It's just you shouldn't be in this seat. Not everybody who's gotten this seat, even though they may have worked their whole lives, not everybody that has gotten this seat should have gotten that seat. That's the other part of that. The other part of it is these people. These people don't know any more about what they're doing than you and I do, Charles. They're all just guessing. they're all just guessing. They just got more money to do it. The owners are just guessing. The GMs are just guessing. But hey, it's always fun to talk to you, man, because I think I appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much. Hey, thanks so much for kicking it with your main man, Michael Smith. Be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel, but also subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Rate it. Review it, tell your friends about it. Oh, and be sure to follow me on social media.